See if you still see it. All right. Now, can everybody see that?
It just shows the PowerPoint. Oh, there it is.
Okay, it should say just 3 ways to grow. Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, sorry about that. So basically, as far as I can tell, there are 3 kinds of characteristics about different markets that really all businesses exist in, and that's really sort of an attribute for each market, each kind of market and each niche market. You've got your mature markets, which have been around a long, long time, and they don't grow very fast. Then you've got brand new markets on the other end of the spectrum, and then somewhere in between you start growing. So what really happens is as you open your business, you kind of grow for a long time, a little bit slow. And then as you continue to build momentum and your brand grows, et cetera, you begin to get into a little faster growth rate. It's pretty seldom, I mean, this S curve can compress or be stretched out, but it's pretty seldom that people just open a business and it just goes crazy. We seem to read about them, and hear about them in business cases and so forth, but it's really, really rare for that to happen. Generally, you go into a period of rapid growth where you're starting to take over, say, market share and continue to grow. But at some point, the market itself has enough players in it. And so, when you start down here, you're usually by yourself. Or you may be with a lot of other competitors, but if you do innovation and you start on your own, the idea takes a while to be accepted, and then slowly people begin to accept it and grow. And you can take a look at like radio, how long it took for that to get started, and even television took a long time, and even the internet. There was a lot of slow growth from 92, 3, 4, 5 till about 98, and then it sort of took off, and then you had this incredible acceptance in the marketplace of the internet. And now we're not growing so much because we're somewhere up in here, because the internet is well accepted, everybody uses it, so there's no place for it to grow. That's why people talk about emerging markets and going to third world countries in order to be able to get more customers and take technology elsewhere. So those are the 3 ways. So knowing where your business is really relative to understanding how you're going to promote your business in the future, and how you do it at the front end when you don't have very much money, but you need to have a market, versus how much you keep putting into marketing when you're growing rapidly. And of course, when you finally start to mature. A lot of people don't see all 3 phases of their own business. That many times doesn't happen. A lot of times you're in the second, third generation before you have this slow growth. So another way to look at this is, how many there are in each one. And in a mature market, now this is the curve just backwards. The mature market, you got about 90% of folks in business are in mature markets. If you're a plumber, that's a mature market, and you might start your plumbing business off, and it goes slowly, and then you grow a little bit faster as people get your brand. But you end up running into competitors pretty fast, and you've got to be doing a lot better than other plumbers before you can really start that rapid growing or maintain it. But sooner or later it flattens out. And so interestingly, the rapidly growing markets are a very small percentage, and then the emerging markets are just a little teeny kind of group of things, of markets that survive. And for every one that we think of that is a new market that has been something, I don't know, Instagram, that was a new market several years ago already, but for every Instagram, there were about 50 or 60 that didn't survive, that because they couldn't grab the market. They couldn't manage to pull it off, really, for a variety of reasons. So if we put these characteristics together, you can kind of see what the advantages, disadvantages are. So when you have a stagnant market, you have to steal business in order to grow. I mean, where are you going to get it? If you're selling milk bottles, that's a stagnant market because milk is actually declining in value. So you have to find orange juice or other things to put in your milk bottle in order to be able to continue your market. Uh, in a stagnant market, often you just get inflation plus a couple of percentage growth points because you're dealing with the cost of money, and then maybe you can actually grow a little bit, but since you have to steal it from everybody else, it makes it harder to do. The margins are very competitive and therefore small. And therefore, it's very slow moving, and your value profile is mostly low cost because you end up in a situation where your value, and we're going to talk about value today, your value proposition, as some people call it, has to you have to work very hard because the competition is so keen on what you're doing and what they're trying to innovate that you have a very difficult time differentiating yourself. We talked about electronics a couple of times, and that's something where the value is hard to discern because the quality is so incredible on most electronic components. Really not components, on finished goods. So if you're gonna buy a well, in the old days, let's say a CD or a radio or and nowadays a cell phone, if you're going to be buying electronics like that, the quality is very, very high. And so, yes, you can take a look at quality differentiators, but it's almost impossible to for the normal person to discern the difference between a Samsung and an Apple. As you know, I like to look at consumer reports, and the new lineup for smartphones shows that the Samsung top of the line Samsung is now 1 point higher than Apple. The one's a 91 and the other's a 90, something like that. So, on a 100-point scale, your top is 91. 1 point's pretty close. So, there are a lot of folks that have a hard time delineating the difference. So in a growth market, you really have to be on a growth track. Here it's really different because in the growth market, you must grow faster than your competitors. Why? Because if everybody's going up 10% a year and you go up 5% a year, they're gaining market share on you every year. And so you'll be fine for a few years, but ultimately what happens is that you begin to have this consolidation in the industry. And then the consolidators, the ones who are buying everybody up, fire people, get rid of products or whatever they're going to do with the company that they bought. But one way or the other, they're just plain gone. And so that happens for the PIMS reasons that we talked about, last meeting. And that is that as you have higher and higher margins and bigger market share, you have the ability to invest in buying other companies, buying products, and investing in innovation. And so, that's the standard. If you're in a fast-growing business, you better be growing faster than everybody else. It's sort of like, what do you have to do if you're getting chased by a bear? And the answer is you have to run faster than the other guy. It's the same thing with this market. In a growth market, you have good margin opportunities. And the reason there is that there are lots of differentiators within the marketplace. Everybody's trying new things. And as a result, it's hard to measure straight quality or service. and you're able to get a little higher margin in a growth market. The advantage, of course, is that it's easy growth because everybody's growing, but it does attract competition like flies. And so if you're in a market that has easy access, a low threshold to entry, then you're going to have tons of people pouring in and taking that business away from you pretty fast. So, finding a niche that doesn't have competition is hard, because the more business you do, the more you attract attention. Let's see. And then finally, a new market. The problem with new markets is that you've got to figure out how you're going to cover your entry costs. It can be extremely expensive to develop a new product. It is. And so if you're developing a new product, you might be surprised at how hard it is. Where a client is recently working on a couple of telephone, cell phone projects. One of them, one company is putting, it's like a donut with slots in it, and you can put a cell phone in there, and therefore you can view it if you're watching a movie or something. And then another one, it's a little slide that goes on the back of the phone, and it's like an easel. And so what happens there is that easel just kind of helps it stand up, just like the other one does. So where the donut was an interesting idea and it's unusual, son of a gun, somebody came right along and invented another way to do exactly the same purpose. Two totally different products. If there's patents on them, I doubt there'd be any kind of a problem, one patent versus another patent. But the issue there is people need to have a way to prop their cell phone up. And so how are they going to do it? Here are two solutions. So, how much does it cost? Well, to do that in plastic, you're talking about, I believe, the second one, the easel one, I think just getting the dies was $80,000 alone. So, coming up with even a plastic product can be extremely costly. So how are you going to recover that? In a new market, you've got to grow fast enough to beat inflation, and hopefully you will. But if you're on that long build, sometimes it's hard to do that. So you're trying to grow fast, and you're trying to get acceptance. It can be really hard, and yet you're still trying to cover all your entry costs and your marketing costs, which can be very costly if it's a new idea. Margins are excellent opportunities there for good margins. Those are the people who really make the money. Many times their margins might be 60, 70, 80%. Why? Because you're in a brand new market, there's no competition, you've invented something, and that's where the big margins come from. The advantages are there's no competition. Disadvantages, very, very high development costs that we've talked about. And it's a very high creativity and deep understanding of the customer that is required in order to know the way that they look at the value. These are highly risky ideas, and many times you can't even show prototypes easily unless you go ahead and spend the $80,000 to start production. So those are the differences in those three markets. There's another characteristic that really transcends all markets, and they're really two poles that are opposite of each other. One is that certain kinds of relationships in markets are either transactional or relationship. So what that really means is that transactional is buying something really common and continually. And like, say, with the gas company, I recently had a problem with the gas. Yesterday, they're paving my street. I hope you can't hear the equipment today, but they were paving my street, and somebody ran into my gas line, and it didn't blow up in the sense that there was fire associated with it, but the pipe blew out. And so we had this jet stream of gas coming out, and we had to evacuate and so forth. And so they're still out there working on it. We got our gas back this morning. So that's been a kind of a straight. So I'm thinking about gas right now. That's why I'm using utilities as an example. But your utilities, in 35 years, I've probably had a conversation with one of the utility guys 3 times, and it's very transactional. I know what I'm going to get. They know what they're going to provide. And every single month we pay the bill. And so that's a real example of transactional. On the other hand, relationship is really where in order to be able to do business, you need to have a strong individual relationship with the customer. Consulting is one of those where relationship is very valuable in order to be able to keep the business. Then there are a lot of other businesses like CPAs and maybe attorneys. A lot of business services are relational in nature, and so that's a real difference in the way that the transaction happens, in the way that you consider your business, is whether or not you're going to have a high interaction with customers or a lower interaction of customers. And so you've got those 2 poles, transactional versus relationship. Then on the other hand, you've got markets that have high competition and markets that have low competition. And so that kind of manifests itself in something like this, where you have no competition on one side and high competition on the other side. Transactional relationship, non-relationships, just transactional business. You buy a candy bar in a store, and versus a relationship where you're going to talk to somebody to get a recommendation maybe for somebody to do business with. So on that scale, you can go through and plot businesses in different places. And so this is exactly what I've done. So I think I plotted my clients in this particular one. It's been a few years. Each one of these represents a different client with a different circumstance, and you can see how different and diverse it is. So if we take a look then and we talk just about market intensity, this whole relationship this concept that I'm talking about, where you do have a lot of competition, it kind of looks like this. You have a scale from one side to the other side. And one is, and I think we talked about this in an early meeting, one of them is, an example is a well that's in a desert. And if it's, the only water within 100 miles, you are really well placed. And you're in placed well because I'm using too many words for 2 different reasons here. So emplacement is something that is a concept that we're going to talk more about. But what it means is that you've kind of surrounded yourself, and you don't have, it's not easy for people to compete. So in this case, just the geography alone allows you to compete extremely robustly, I'll say, instead of well, because you have the only well. And so people will do whatever it takes to get there and to buy something. Then on the other end, you've got the old proverbial Eskimo selling ice. And so it's very difficult. It's highly intensive. And so you have this kind of relationship where there's low intensity for the well, and there's high intensity for selling ice to Eskimos. And so that has a lot to do with what goes on in the way that you do your marketing planning, is whether or not you fit into a niche that is closer or further. And so, you've got all of these different places you can be on this scale. And then if we take a look then at several of them, we'll plot what kinds of industries go certain places. So CPAs are sort of here. Why? Well, high relationship. But and they're only moderately competitive. Yes, they do have competition, but because they're regulated in the sense that they're self-regulated, and that is they require a license. You have to pass the state boards, and the other CPAs are the ones who figure out what the questions are, et cetera. So as a result, they make it tough enough so that they can literally regulate how many CPAs are admitted each year. Same thing with the bar for attorneys. And so because they can regulate it, they've been able to keep the CPAs not terribly competitive. It's not to say there isn't competition, because you do have bookkeepers, but it's not terribly competitive. And then you've got another group that's similar, the attorneys. And why is it different? Well, it's different because they've overschooled and there are too many attorneys. And so, and then you have the difference between litigators who maybe go to court and ambulance chasers. And then you've got business attorneys. And so you have this wide range of things that attorneys do. And as a result, there's a little bit more competition, yet they're still not transactional. They're primarily relationship. Real estate agents are highly relationship, as you know, but they're, as we begin to have more digital kind of movement into that market, that's going to become less and less. Sure, it's nice to know the real estate agent, but by the same token, there are a lot of people who are trying to destroy and disrupt that relationship by making it more transactional. So if you can do a virtual walk through a house and see it and zoom in on Google and determine that you like the house and you're ready to maybe take a look at it, and all the real estate person does is open the door, let you walk through, and then transact the business, you can see that we're going towards a place where the relationship is less and less valuable. And so it is highly competitive, but it is moving towards transactional. So here's another example. Casualty insurance is something where, you kind of do know who your insurance agent is. Maybe you might have had one conversation with them, maybe not. And car insurance, it's much more transactional than it is for, say, house insurance. And there is a huge, huge amount of competition. I mean, it's like all the way at the end of the scale there. And as a result, the pricing is good and so forth. But it's not quite transactional, but it's moving that direction. And then you've got retail, which kind of stretches the gamut. When you go into a grocery store, you're up in here somewhere. You don't really have much of a relationship with people. You might know some of the checkout folks, but other than that, you're just out shopping and you're looking for what it is that you want. Your relationship is really with the product that you're going to buy, if there is any relationship at all. And then on the other end of the scale, the reason that it goes towards no competition and a little bit more towards relationship is that you get into high-end fashion shops, and many times the owners know all their customers personally. And so in a case like that, you have less and less competition, and you begin to move down into the corner, although the relationship is minor compared to the product itself. Hardware is highly transactional. It varies from lots of competition to no competition, depending on what kind of hardware you're talking about. If you're just going to go buy a hammer, then you're sort of like high competition, go in, buy it. If on the other hand, you're going to buy some sort of a laser cutter, you may want to go have a conversation with somebody, and there are only maybe 2 or 3 things to choose from. I use a company, I do a lot of woodworking, and I use a company called Craig, and they have been incredibly innovative in developing tools for woodworking. And you can only buy these innovative tools really from them. You can buy them through stores, but they have very little competition because they've been so innovative. And that's an example of how innovation gets rid of competition. And then, of course, you've got something like cement manufacturing, that there's not much competition and it's mostly transactional. And then finally, here we are with a gas company, and that is, no, we have no relationships with anybody. There's no competition because it's regulated. And so those are all of the places. And so now the question is, well, where does your business, idea fall here? If you're going to have a coffee shop, for instance, there you're high competition. Everybody sells coffee, and if you are more on the relationship side, that gives you a little bit of a leg up. But for the most part, most people will just walk into, their maybe Starbucks, and they might be over here, but they would go, if you go into a lot of other places, you don't really care. Maybe it's over here, so maybe it would be something like that. So that's a whole different kind of business model when you have such incredible competition. And what it means is you want to do your best to be like Craig Hardware, where you've got some unique things. Starbucks became unique because of the way they did their stores, but they also became unique because they continued to develop these new flavors. And Starbucks has actually turned into a fashion company, and they now have fashionable coffees and teas and other drinks for each season. And so when you've got seasonal stuff, you're definitely in that side of the business. Okay, so let's talk about market cracks. This is where we really start to talk about what can happen and what should happen when you're developing a business. And that is, and you all know that I'm big on finding cracks in the market, but what are they? And so let's talk about all the different ways you can delineate a market. First, you've got the general industry, like the automotive. You've got um, well, every industry you can think of. You've got the tech industry. You've got the entertainment industry, the retail industry. All those general industries is one way, and it's kind of the first place that you start. Let's see. I think if somebody could turn off their mic, we're getting a lot of feedback here. Maybe that's Edgar. Is that you? Here we go. All right, that's better. Good, thanks. And then so the next is geographic, and then of course, if you are a plumber, you're probably going to be in a region or a city, so that's a geographic. Then a specialization. When you are specializing in doing something much narrower, and of course you can get way specialized. When you talk about the automotive industry, that's a big industry, and there's a lot of difference between one thing with four wheels and another thing with four wheels. And so you've got you could specialize in electric cars, like Tesla specializes, or small cars, that sort of thing. And so that would be a specialization. And then of course there are companies that become so specialized they actually start doing things custom. And so you go in and they design and build right to your specialization. And that's a lot of specialization in there. Specification and stickiness. This is building something custom to their specifications, or the stickiness part of that is you can't let go of it because the criteria has been specialized. So for instance, if you have a need to repair your refrigerator, there's a good chance that they will specify a certain kind of replacement product or part, and therefore you cannot get away from the company. You have to buy it. If you are buying one of those little not sign makers, but tag makers, that goes through and prints on a little sheet of paper, they're really careful to make sure that, not very many people's paper will fit into that machine. Same thing with staples. That's stickiness. You can't really get rid of it because it is so highly specialized that you have to buy theirs, or you have to buy exactly the thing that fits that might be from just a few vendors. And so that's another kind of market crack. Distribution control, that really used to be the traditional distribution, which is, you make or manufacture something, and then you send it to a warehouse, a distributor, and they would get closer to the marketplace geographically. And then there might actually be a selling organization that goes out and sells like items. I know that there's a whole category of findings in the shoe industry that includes polish and shoelaces and, you know, shoe horns and all things having to do with shoes. Well, you know, a shoehorn company would have a hard time distributing their shoehorns to every single, say, retailer in the country. So what they do, they end up going, to a warehouse, and the warehouse will handle the distribution and the selling of that, and it works because they sell more than shoehorns. They're selling all the findings together. So if you are in the market for those kinds of things, you really want to sell a whole bunch of things, and you have a huge advantage. Well, as you well know, this distribution control has kind of gone away. And that's because you can go on online today and you can buy shoehorns directly from the shoehorn manufacturer if that's what you want. You can go to Amazon and you can buy shoehorns, and they may have volume discounts. As a matter of fact, Amazon has a whole section for industrial supplies. You know, very few of us have probably seen it, but they sell quantities. So you can't, you know, it's sort of like Costco. You go there and you buy something, shoehorns, and you buy by the dozen. An individual doesn't want to buy a dozen shoehorns, but a retailer does want to buy a dozen shoehorns. And therefore, even that category of volume buying is being displaced by Amazon and all of those folks. And so distribution is a big deal, and it's really changed. And of course, there's a lot of opportunity because of this distribution. And of all of the things that have happened in this COVID virus, what we're seeing is a realignment of distribution, probably more than any of these other things. You know, there's still a restaurant, they're still in a certain town, certain street. They still specialize in Chinese food. They probably don't have the ability to do specification stickiness, but their distribution is such now that they're having to find three ways to distribute their meals to people instead of just having people come and sit down and eat. And so distribution is really being affected. Some people call it the Amazon effect. And then this referral and symbiotic is another way to define the crack in your market. And this is really powerful. If you can do this, you want to. One example I use is that there was a motor rebuilding company that happened to have a brother-in-law for a body shop. And so whenever anybody brought anything in to repair, anything having to do with the engine was referred to his brother-in-law. And so that's a referral system. It's kind of a little bit like distribution, if you will. But what happens there is that for the customers that go into that particular shop and have their automobile repaired, those customers are automatically, without them even knowing, automatically sending their motor over to the referral, and therefore that guy's business is completely and totally protected. There's no way anybody can get to it. That's also part of a moat strategy that we're going to talk about a little bit. A symbiotic is very similar in that there is a relationship that both of the parties have that causes them to stay in business with each other. And so each of them had a symbiotic relationship. It works even better if each party is producing part of the product and they have to stay together because of distribution control, specification, and stickiness. They're building products for each other, and that's all. So that's another way to define your market. And of course, relationship. Now, relationship is a powerful thing, and it's worth a subject all on its own. But for the most part, for those businesses where relationship is important, it is one of the most, the best, quote, moat strategies or the best ways to defend your marketplace, because you have strong relationships with your customers. And that is really, really important when you can develop it. It's hard to do. With Longmont Dairy, it's pretty much a transactional business. You've got milk, and we've differentiated it so that it doesn't seem like it's the same thing. It's in glass bottles, it's fresher. So there are all of these advantages to that particular product. Enough people believe that's true and see the value in it that they pay more for it. And at the same time, we spend a huge amount of money trying to create a relationship anyway. And so you might say, well, why do you have to have a relationship with your customer if you're selling milk? Well, the answer is because other people sell milk. And if you could pull that off, then you would have a lower drop rate, and your cycling through customers goes down, and you can make more money. And so for all of these, last 30 years, we have developed and sent a little fun newsletter called Moo News out to customers once a month. And so during all of these years, you would say, well, why would you spend, we print 30,000 of them at a time. And so, that's a monthly expense. We do all the design, we do all of the writing and the distribution of this thing. And so there's cost involved. And then you print 30,000 of them at, I don't know, 6 or 10 cents a piece or something. So, you're spending some money. So how do we know that it's helped? And the answer is because we have feedback loops, several of them, and we'll talk more about customer feedback later. But for the most part, what we have found is that when we ask the customers to tell us about whether they read Moo News or not, or use the recipes, or if their kids enjoy the games that are in there, or whatever, they tell us overwhelmingly, 85% of them, that yes, they read it every single month. And so that's just a little way to do something that creates a little bit of a bond. And as a result, we think that we're lowering our turnover rate by somewhere in the range of 3 or 4 or 5%. Well, it doesn't sound like a lot, but 5% of 30,000 is what, 1,500? That's pretty substantial. 1,500 people a year might leave your business because it costs $100, $200 to add 1,500 people for each one. And so that's a lot of money. You're talking about a significant amount of money. That amount of money is many times more than the cost of having the relationship program. And then we do other things too, games and involvement in drawing contests, and there's a whole bottle design contest for eggnog every year. And they'll get 300 or 400 entries every single year for people who have actually drawn whatever it is that we're going to put on the bottle that year. That ends up causing people to create a little bit of a relationship, even with their milk delivery company. And so when you can do it, it works. Most other businesses that have a real relationship required, that is really important. And it really makes a huge difference. Authenticity is the last one. And this is something that I realized when we're doing some traveling. And first, I think the way to think about authenticity is, well, really, I'm real, so okay. But there's more to it than that, because most businesses today, especially young business people, like to they like to do business with authentic products and people who authentically design and build and distribute those products, instead of trying to, say, fake a product, buy it from China, and then have it roll in, etc. And so if there's authenticity, it makes a huge difference. And the best example of that is Disneyland. The one thing that Walt Disney did that really made him famous is that he made Front Street and all the different the different areas as authentic looking as he could possibly make them, so that when people came, they felt like this really did look like Main Street. This really would be what a jungle ride was like. And so you had, even though it was fake, you had a certain authenticity that became the standard for delight, if you will. Okay, let's see. Probably time to move on. Any questions about that? Okay, let's move on. And now I'm going to just try and show you how this works a couple of different ways. So here you can see we're going on in from the outside to the inside, where we go through each one of these things. And then this is another representation of it here that kind of shows authenticity here. And then the point here is that every time you can do something, now every business cannot take advantage of every one of these characteristics, but the more that you do take advantage, the narrower the niche gets to be. And the narrower your niche is, the safer you are and the faster growth you're going to have once people understand what it is that you're doing. Now, in the case of the two examples of the smartphone holders, the donut one looks like a donut and has slots in it. It's not immediately apparent what that's for. And so they have to take care that the packaging is right, maybe some advertising, demonstrations. Somehow people need to be shown what that's for so that they could see if they wanted to buy it. On the other hand, the one that has the easel on the back is intuitive. People automatically know and understand what that's for. As long as they see that a cell phone goes in there, they can figure that out. And so that's a case of a company that can go into a brand new product, brand new idea, and get accepted very quickly. So, but for the most part, that can really work for a very small niche. Got off just a little bit there, but let's talk about what are some examples of these, again, just so that you can firm up this concept. General industry, automotive. The geographic location might be Los Angeles. Specialization, used Jaguars. So this is from an example. I probably mentioned to you. When I was working for this national consulting firm, my old boss had two Jaguars, one of them to drive and the other for the shop. And so he had to have a special Jaguar repair shop. Why? Just because he thought that was status. So he would drive down to Newport and take his car to a Jaguar authorized dealer repair shop. So their specialization was used Jaguars. Specification and stickiness. XKE in this particular case, and that is that the only way you can get parts for an XKE is to keep old ones on hand, and that means old XKE cars on hand. And so that would be one where you have to use the original because nobody makes the parts anymore. They had referral into symbiotic relationships because dealers and car clubs and other owners would almost exclusively refer to them, and that's how they got their business. And the authenticity, well, when you take your car into this place, excuse me, when you take your car into this place and they only have Jaguars, and that is it, and you've got everybody with Jaguar shirts on and Jaguar stuff all over the place, you have no doubt that they're an authentic, dealer. And then, of course, the relationship, what they got to know all of their customers really well because it's a Jaguar. They see their customers about every 1 or 2 months. And of course, that's because they fall apart and need servicing that often. And so the relationship actually was something that was very useful for them because they really did spend a lot of money. And you'll remember in this case, my boss thought this whole thing was all about status because not only could he afford one Jaguar, he could afford 2 because one is literally in the shop most of the time. So that's kind of how that works. Now, if we put it another way, you've got a geography, California, you've got distribution control, the authenticity, and then finally the relationship. And they happen to be in Southern California. So I mean, they've really defined their market very well, and they have enough business in that market in order to be able to make a good living. Okay, I want to talk about the Warren Buffett for a minute. The Moat Strategy is something that I read a little bit about, and then I realized that it's something that Warren Buffett has used to protect all of his businesses. This is really interesting, and it's very similar to emplacement concept that I've developed over the years. And here are the reasons why he uses the Moat Strategy. And I'll just read through this quickly. I'm sorry to actually read it, but the network effect, it's a business that increases value as it increasingly connects with others. And this is a case that is, I think we could say, MicroGiants, will be using this, as you guys know, more and more people. And clearly Edgar is working on that with his collaborative networks. So that's one effect of that. It's difficult to leave. It's where customers lack the incentive to stop a service, such as telephone or cable service. And then, of course, my name for that is stickiness, but it's very difficult to. Now, the telephone is a lot easier than it used to be, and cable service is getting a lot easier too. So this isn't quite as good of as an example as it used to be. Maybe Netflix is one. Oh, not Netflix. Netflix actually said if you don't watch a movie, they're going to ask you if they can kick you off. So I take that back. So I've got to think of a better example. But there are a lot of things difficult to leave. Actually, like recurring subscriptions on your credit card would be one of those. Yes, you can always stop your credit card, but you forget that it's going to renew every July. And as a result, it renews, and now you've stuck with that magazine for another year. Another characteristic of a Moat Strategy is virtual control of a market, where you have a monopoly or a narrow market where buyers have little choice. Like Google, like Facebook, they're becoming narrow markets where you have little choice. And of course, we call that specialization. And then proprietary patents, licenses, or brands. Coca-Cola is a proprietary. It has a formula and a brand that it shares, and therefore nobody can get Coca-Cola because they own all the intellectual rights. And so the Moat Strategy includes those kinds of businesses. And then being the low-cost producers. We talk about the low-cost producers when we talk about how the PIMS principles. I don't think I mentioned it too much in the last one, but if there's room for two or three in a marketplace based on the PIMS principles, then the question is, well, what about one more low-cost producer? The answer is yes. There's usually room for one low-cost producer in every market. Now, why only one? Well, because once somebody really builds the low cost, if they do it in such a way through breakthrough developments, then they're going to continue to get all of the low-cost business, and they're going to grow, and they're going to put everybody else out of business. So these are the things, these are the barriers that make up the Moat Strategy that Warren Buffett has used to do his investing. And if you know who Warren Buffett is, like the second or third most wealthy person in the world, he did so simply by investing in companies. He's one of the very few people that have made so much money investing in companies. This is how he evaluates what companies to buy, and it's how they put value on companies, is whether or not they have a very deep understanding of these things. So these are just another way to look at our niche marketing model. So there are a lot of things that some additional ideas here just to be able to talk about what are different markets. And you can see I've got hot dog vendor, an independent pharmacy that does compounding, which is totally different than a regular one. Of course, milkmen, avocado packers. These are all different kinds of clients that I have had over the years, where we've actually worked on defining their markets very, very carefully so that they fit into the either Warren Buffett's Moat Strategy or into the finding your crack in the market strategy, and attempted to define them exactly in that way. So when you define your market, you can increase your market position. So a lot of people think that the way to be in business is to have a bunch of products and just go sell anything that you can sell. The problem is that you're actually define the principles that we just talked about when you try to do that. And the reason is you don't have any specialization. You don't have a moat strategy. You're trying to sell anything to anybody. And when you're trying to do that, you look like someone who has no authenticity at all. And so now you don't have that. And so it really, the reverse is the case. And that is, as you narrow your marketplace, you can actually increase your market position and take more control over that particular piece of your business. That's why many times companies find it makes sense to get rid of business units that are not doing well, because they're not directly supporting another business unit, or because they don't have the time and the resources to focus on everything. You can only do so much. There's no company that doesn't have a limit of their resources. Resources are always precious. And so you've got to use your resources to do what you do best. And you typically end up narrowing your market position and growing by increasing market share, rather than adding products, add-on products, and trying to get more business off of your new products. Really understanding your customers helps focus on core competencies. This is something that, as you narrow your market focus, you end up having more customers that are like each other, or they just have this one thing in common, which is your product. And what that helps you understand is more about the customer, which helps you do innovation. And so it's a real asset for small companies to be able to focus on that. And then innovating is what happens. When you innovate in your narrower space, then you're able to differentiate yourself from competitors. And so that, again, that makes sense, because if you're just in a little space, you can focus on innovation in that area that makes sense to your customers, instead of going off on a wild hare and coming up with this idea and this idea and this idea. Too many ideas fractures people's ability to respond to their core business. And then finally, you want to increase value in your market crack. And so that's what we're trying to do here. Okay, let's now switch to value, because value is a big piece of what we want to do. And what we're just talking about sort of leads to perceived value. Now, what is perceived value? Obviously, it's what somebody thinks the value of your product or your company is. And sort of like the customer is always right, you have to be open and allow them to tell you, and you want to ask good questions about it, and find out what they really think, and really, really, really understand your competition. And now the question is, okay, but how do you do that? So we're going to talk about what it is. The components of value include quality, service, and price. Now, nobody really disagrees with these three. I think everybody that I've ever talked to says, oh yeah, that's what value is. But I found that I could never utilize this with a client to do any good until I added image or aesthetics. Some of you have been around a long time, remember me talking about this early on. And so what that does is that gives us a scale that we can begin to measure against. And we want to measure everything we can possibly measure so we can see if we do it better. And the scale looks like this. And so again, we've got kind of four different pieces: quality, price, service, and image. Image can be thought of as brand or aesthetics as well. So the image really covers, in this case, just covers this broad range of what people look at, what they see when they're in your office, the way that your people are dressed, the packaging, yes, the logo, but you can see that logo is one of a list of 20 or 30 items here that really gives a full total visual image and mental image of what your company is like and what you do and where you are in your marketplace. So then what we're able to do with this value diamond is just to ask a simple question of your top key people or your customers. And that is on a scale of 0 to 100 or 0 to 5, how would you rate our quality? And so then you would say, how do you rate our competitors' quality? And so in a case like this, they say, well, you're about an 87 and maybe a 92, and your competitor comes in at about 79 or 80. Okay, great. So we're a little bit ahead on that one if we're the green one. And then we would say, okay, well, how about on service? Well, I can't tell any difference in service. You're both really very good. You have excellent service. Well, okay, so now you're on top of each other there. And then on price, how are you? Well, you're a little bit more expensive, but then your quality is a little bit better. And so, I think you're okay on price, but, their price is a little lower. So really, a lot of times when the perceived quality is lower, the only way people can sell things is to actually lower the price so that they can get people to buy it and grab theirs instead of yours. And then the real differentiator is image. And so people say, well, when you think of our service and our quality and our price and everything about the company, how do we fare? Well, you're really great. We love your company. We like what it stands for. We think it looks professional, whatever. And then the other guy, he kind of looks a little schlocky and we're not really sure about him and so forth. Well, so what happens here is that typically when we do this in the field, with real businesses, we find that if in fact the area is larger, that you usually win the business. In other words, when you're doing a better job on these 4 characteristics, that's when you can actually win business. And furthermore, what it does is it helps you understand what you need to work on. So, for instance, if your service came in at way lower than everybody else's service, then you know that you can start working on that and try and make it better. And that can be a big deal. And so making it better is potentially easy to do. You may know that you've got terrible people on the telephone and they've given wrong information or whatever, and you can fix that. Quality is a little harder to do. I mean, how do you actually increase the quality of your product? You might even be buying it from other people. And if you're buying it at retail, you can buy better quality product. But if you're a manufacturer, making the quality better is a really time-consuming and expensive proposition, and it's hard to move this very far. So this poor guy's got a lot to do to try and catch up to you, and so that's really nice to see. Meanwhile, because you're considered higher quality, and if you also have a higher market share, as we learned in the PIMS last meeting, that chances are they will pay more for the product, and you're really not losing business to this company, even though the price is a little bit lower. You're probably winning most of the time. And so that's going to give you more margin, and that'll give you more money to do whatever you need to do in investment and innovation to be able to continue on and maintain that marketplace. So what we're suggesting is that you want to define your crack in the market, and you want to create value for your customers. So, okay, now, having gone through these basic principles about marketing, then the next thing is, well, how do we plan to do it? And so we've talked about business planning, and we pieced together several of those aspects, on building a business plan and what you have to look at. And we've also talked a little bit about studying customers and so forth too. But what we want to talk now is how do you do the marketing planning in order to be able to put all the pieces together? Because we haven't begun to talk about media or message, and there's a lot to get this product done in terms of marketing and get it out there. And a lot of times, small business people are guilty of not putting together a coordinated effort. And it's very clear from the research that a coordinated effort across multiple media is actually much more effective than when you just decide to do an ad over here, and oh yeah, I need to do a spot over here, and I'm going to do some flyers, and I'm going to put some of them up on the my coffee shop board. It's like doing this random stuff I have never found to be very effective. Now, that's not to say that some of these things don't hit and that some of them don't work. There was a whole genre about 6 or 7, 8, now 10 years ago maybe, sort of like flash mob kinds of marketing things, where people would like show up and paint a bridge and put logos all over, just kind of in strange, interesting, and fun ideas where they got tremendous amounts of publicity. But those are really the same as they've always been. They're publicity stunts. So nothing's really changed there. Can those things work? Yeah, sure, they can. But what are you going to do next week? So you need to have a plan. And so here's where we go and how we do it. This is what I found to be extremely profitable, and that is the marketing planning cycle. And the cycle is important because it's hard to start at the top or the bottom, although I prefer starting at the top. But many times with clients, we have to start in another place because they are already somewhere in the cycle. But in the perfect world, this is how you do your planning. You start with a customer profile. Now, if you're in business, you go through and you do a very deep analysis of customers. And we'll talk a lot more about that. Then the next thing you do is you look at a competitive analysis. That really is taking a look in your niche now at the people who are really your competitors. And sometimes they're not who you think they would be, because there are alternative products that people can buy instead of yours, and they can just decide not to solve their problem with your product, but to solve a similar problem or the problem with another product. So competitive analysis there, and again, there are ways to do this. It may not be all that easy sometimes. It may not seem like it. However, with the internet today, it's amazing how much information you can just find out about a company very quickly. And so it's not as hard as it used to do. But when you have small companies in small niche markets, sometimes it's hard to figure out exactly what they do and how they fit. But for the most part, it's relatively easy to do. And then, of course, you need to do some market research about your own market. You need to know the characteristics of the market, the characteristics of the product within the market. And then when we've done this stuff, then we can finally say, well, let's start thinking about targeting. What kind of a customer will we target? Well, it always makes more sense to go after customers that are like, or go after prospects that are like your customers, than it does to try and find some people who are different. So with Longmont Dairy, we have all kinds of customers. Out of 62 different psychographic customer types that the Mosaic system has in the country. I think we represent about 54 of them. But the top 8 also represents half of them. So the Pareto principle is in play here. So you end up doing 80% of your business with 20% of your customers, and in this case, we're doing about 85-90% of the business with about 15% of the customers. So yeah, they represent all of these. But why would we go to a customer that we have 4 of when we've got 22,000 of another kind? Now you might say, well, that's because you've already got all 22,000. Well, but of course you don't. I mean, if there are only 22,000 customers and you had 20,000 of them, you really would say, I think we've got to open up another market here. We're not going to grow. But that's not the case. Of the 30,000 customers that we have, and we take a look at those 8 or 12 top customer types, of those people in the Metro Denver area, there are 1 million customers, and we've only got 30,000. So there's plenty of market here. So if you're not going to run out of market, you don't have to worry about finding a new type of customer. You simply work on targeting the people who you already know are your best customers. And then we finally get to the place where we can do market positioning. So marketing positioning, we've talked about this, but marketing positioning is a process of creating the image that you want customers to see you in, that would place you in a little smaller niche or a little different way than your competitors. It's a way of hiding your customers from your competitors if you can do it really well, so that your competitors don't even know you're there. And surprisingly, there are actually businesses like that. Not a lot, but there are some. So finally, you've done your marketing positioning, and now we can do our campaign planning. Now, normally, when you do market planning, the first thing that happens is you talk about message and media. But that's not how it should work. You should understand what the market positioning is first, because you can't use the right words if you don't know what marketing positioning you're taking. And if you can't use the right words, how are you going to write an ad or a brochure or your website? You've got to know the message, and the message depends on your customers and your marketing positioning. And without those, you can't really come up with a good solution. And by that, I'm saying it is possible to be successful anyway, but for the most part, if you're successful, you're in a niche, and you don't do these things, you're in a niche that doesn't require any marketing at all. You've got a well in the desert. So if you have a well in the desert, you don't even need to do any marketing planning. All you have to do is say, put an open sign up, because that's your marketing right there. It's like, yeah, we'll let you buy water from us right now. And other than that, you don't have to do anything. I mean, maybe you would put signs out on the desert along the caravan route or something like that, just to say, oh, by the way, stop at, Joe's Water or whatever. But, for the most part, you don't have to do anything. So when we're talking about the marketing planning cycle, we're applying it to intense markets where there's a lot of competition, or you need improvement in your marketing positioning just in general, because you're losing some business because they don't understand who you are. So now we get to the campaign planning, and then the first thing you do is you develop your content. And content in this case is like everything. It's the words you use, it's the media that you are going to be using, and the imagery that you're going to use. If you're a certain kind of a mission, for instance, you want to use imagery that portrays those emotional kinds of things that you want your customers to, your prospects to think about when they might give to your mission. If you are selling high-end eyewear, then you're going to, you're going to use imagery that people who want to buy high-end stuff and have the money to buy it associate with, as opposed to a homeless person. So I mean, those are pretty extreme examples, but you want imagery that works, and there's no reason to begin picking imagery until you understand the marketing positioning. Once the content development has begun, now you're never going to get this all done before you start, but you're going to get a lot of it done. Then you can actually get into promotion, advertising, PR. Now, how did advertising happens? It normally starts when the salesman walks in the door. The salesman comes in, I want to sell you a radio ad. Oh, okay. Well, why should we use radio? Well, because we've got, 80% of your customers and we get this, and they give you all the stats. And you go, well, maybe we should consider doing some of that. It's like, no, that's not how you do it. You would never have a conversation with a salesperson selling media until you already have developed this plan. And it's just exactly the wrong thing to do. And so I spend most of my time with brand new clients trying to tell them that they don't need to talk to any salesman at all, because we actually find them to impede our ability to do the job. Now, newspapers, Ed, hate that. That's not good for newspapers. They do well because they have salespeople that walk in and create a need. Okay, then we finally get to sales. Yay, we're doing some sales. We've got a sales team maybe, or people on the phone taking sales. And then we have a feedback and assessment, and then it loops back in. And what happens is this just goes around and around and around. And I have found that with mature customers, clients, that it takes about 3 years to go around. So it's not a short-term thing. I had a conversation with a friend. I don't take clients anymore, except for MicroGiant types. And this guy said, well, because we talked a little bit about this, well, how do you get marketing? We've got to have more business. We're not very successful. They're in a type of consulting business. And I explained that, well, I don't know how to tell you anything because I don't know anything about your customers and I don't know anything about your competitors. Well, actually, I did know something about the competitors, but I can't compare you to anything. So how am I supposed to be able to give you, any? I'm not a magician. I just am a guy that understands how to, and have learned how to do the process that increases business because you do the right stuff. And I can't tell you the right stuff. And, and he kept saying, but we need something quick and dirty. I'm going, quick and dirty? I mean, you've been doing that, haven't you? Well, yeah. And as a matter of fact, I hate marketing people. Okay, yeah, well, why is that? Well, they don't know what they're doing. They never can prove anything and they lie about it. And I said, well, actually, I agree with that. Most marketing people don't know this stuff. I've never known a marketing person that actually built plans this way. This is in most companies, this would be considered really strategy. But the problem is that you get past the targeting or marketing positioning, and now sort of the strategy goes away, and it's never really taken forward. And so, because marketing is this huge enchilada, most people have expertises, specialties in smaller pieces of marketing, and so it takes more of a strategic viewpoint in order to be able to understand even how to build a marketing plan that will work. And so anyway, we agreed that there's no reason for me to be really working with him because he wanted a quick answer, and I don't know how to give a quick answer. I just know how to do it the right way that I have found has worked for almost every client that I've had the last, say, 15 or 20 years. Okay, a little bit more about marketing positioning, and this is a visual of what we're talking about. So you've got your customers over here, and you've got your competition, and you have a sense for where they overlap, and this represents the overlap. And then you've got your core competencies. Now, this is really where your company needs to understand what it's really capable of doing, because now you overlay your core competencies with your competition. What do you have that's to get the same, and what do you have that's different, and your customers. And the interesting thing is that in this quadrant where your core competencies overlay your customers and you do not share the competition, here is your sweet spot. This is where you'll find that you are going to do business, because you try to stay away from your competition. You try to be specialized so that they can't really compete with you in that way, and you certainly try to hide from them who your customers are. I'm going to skip that one.
Ron,
Yeah,
I just had a question for the core competencies. You
sure.
said it's what you can handle.
Yeah, the core competencies really has to do with your staff, what your staff's capabilities are, your equipment, and those capabilities, your financial resources. You know, can you take on a really big job, and can you finance that adequately so that you can pay everybody? It's really your total ability to deliver the product. And
Okay.
so now a lot of people, the reason I say core competencies is that a lot of people say, well, we can do welding and we work with metal and we do this and this, and therefore, yeah, well, we can build X. So have you ever built that before? Well, no, but that's what I call. Then that's, don't count that as your core competency. You need to be able to be really good at this. And that expertise and that level of quality, as we've seen, is really important in order to be able to accomplish all of these different things. And so competency really has to do with, can you develop the highest quality product in the right volume and service that?
Hmm. All right. Thank you.
Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sure. Good. Let's see. I'm going to skip past this, but what I want to talk about here is really positioning a little bit, trying to position the quality, their features and benefits, et cetera, together. One of the things that good positioning does is it allows you to hide from your customers. So if we have this like checkerboard, and if you kind of envision that your customers are the black customers up here, and this is your company right here, or your positioning here, and then you've got your competition, or your competition's customers over here. What you want to do is you want to try and prevent the competition from seeing your customers. And so that's how you block this, through specialization and other and Moat strategy. Meanwhile, you're in a position to be able to see most of their customers, or get to most of their customers. And so you can see that by changing your positioning, you change the angle. So in this particular case here, it's like you're just protecting a couple because you're too close to them. And here, you're really checking the view of a lot more of your customers because you're a little further away and you're a little wider. Your positioning has changed. Meanwhile, the same thing happens on the reverse end. So it's just kind of an illustration, hopefully, to point out that by positioning yourself and by using emplacement, which we haven't talked much about yet, but by using emplacement, which is Moat strategy stuff, you can put yourself in an advantage over your competition, where they don't really understand who your competitors are. We found that in with Red Fusion when we were in business early on. We were able to build websites for people and put our name on there, but nobody could figure out really well. No, it's the reverse. We tried to keep it quiet, but because we started building websites for them, everybody knew exactly who we were. And so they could see who our customers are. So we just took our name off of the website because we didn't want them to know that they were ours. And so, that's a simple one, but there are a lot of other ways you can do that too, by sort of hiding. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. So the emplacement and positioning is when you have a physical emplacement. Is a physical placement within a defined crack. It also has to do with where you are. And when we talk about this in more detail, like if you consider yourself as being in a battle with a competitor, and you've got your people standing up against his people, there, and you're getting ready to have a frontal attack, that can be a real kind of a bloody thing. And it makes more sense to do an end around and try and flank them somehow, because you can sneak around, you can attack from the side or from the back. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of what we're thinking about. There are marketing books that follow the old Chinese book, The Art of War, which is, I don't know, 500, 6,000 years old. It's this ancient art of war thing. And it's amazing how close marketing is to the art of war. And so emplacement is both the act of putting a moat around your castle, but it's also the way that you position yourself in a market niche that maybe somebody hasn't figured out yet. Maybe your competitor's not there yet. Maybe they don't have the ability to make that little piece and you do. And so that's kind of what we're talking about, is what are the advantages that you can determine based on the way that you position yourself in the market, what you do say publicly and what you don't say publicly. Positioning is selecting the appropriate differentiators to plant the brand in the mind of the customer. That's from a very famous book, and you've heard me say this, the 22 immutable the 22 immutable marketing laws by a guy by the name of Jack Trout and Al Reed. And they have come up with these 22 principles, which I cannot find any flaw in. And I'm pretty skeptical about some of these concepts that marketers come up with, but I can't find any problem with that. And they're the ones who really invented the term and the concept of positioning. And I really respect the work that they've done on that, because I've seen it do nothing but help make money for people. And then maneuvering intentionally to keep customers away from competition, or competition away from customers. Now, there are two kinds of customers, and we're not getting in we're going to talk really about customers, which is the first kind of topic when we're in the planning cycle. So we've got two kinds. We've got those businesses that sell to other businesses, and then we have businesses that sell to the consumer or to the direct customer. Business to business, you need to understand where your business comes from in terms of the kinds of customers that you have, who are other businesses, what industries that they're in, what size are they, how many employees do they have, what's their geographic coverage, what's their marketing plan, all the things that you can come up with about those business customers is important. Understanding where your profit comes from. Now, this isn't the same thing as where your business comes from, because the Pareto rule, we know that 80% of most business comes from 20% of the customers, but that doesn't mean that your margin dollars is the same distribution. In fact, a lot of times your big kahuna customers who give you all that volume are the ones that demand the lower price. And so you negotiate a lower price to keep the volume. Pretty soon you're finding that your next tier of customers is the most profitable group of customers, because they're willing to pay your full price, and that you're making more money from them than you are the big ones. So you have to be careful on this trade-off between margin and volume. And then understanding the profile of each of the decision makers. This is sort of another level down, and that is that it's not, many times, it's not the business or the owner that's making the decision about how much money to spend with you. It is the buyer in the business who's making the decision of how much to buy from you. So you have to know who the buyer is, what their interests are, the kind of person that they are, in the sense that, the way that they do business. And so that's another level of understanding business to business customers. Understanding business to consumers is another whole different enchilada, if you will. And that is that you've got all these different kinds of people. I've mentioned this to you, and some of you have seen the presentation I did for John's class. Basically, it includes demographics, which are, I think everybody understands, and psychographics, which is misspelled, I see, for the first time in I don't know how many years. So psychographics is what it's supposed to be. That's lifestyle, which has to do with what people buy. And then when you put them into different groups, then they're buying the same kinds of things, even though their demographics are different. It's much more useful to understand people's buying habits than what their demographics are, because demographics are just things that we can't help, like age, sex, race. That's just the way it is. That's got nothing to do with the way that we buy and consume products. And so the psychographics and lifestyle analysis really helps us understand how they buy, and that's much more important. This is sort of a blow up, but this shows you some of the main, as they call, cohorts. Those are people who are like each other, who buy the same kinds of things. So you can put them on scales, and it's interesting. There are a lot of scales here. So it goes from retirement to wage earners on the bottom to the top. It goes from singles to families across this way. And then the same thing, rural to urban, and multicultural to American heartland, which I'm not exactly sure what that means, but high income to low income. So you can see that now what they've done is they've taken all of these individual groups and they fit them on this sort of generalized scale to show the characteristics of these groups. So, the FO2s, that's a group. They're similar but different from the FO3s. And all the Fs are kind of in the same group. You can see the line around them. And so when we talk about Longmont Dairy, their primary customers are As and Bs and a couple of Cs. And then they have an odd F here and an H somewhere. So, those represent most of them. So I can tell you exactly who they are simply by looking at the chart. So we have AO2 is a really big one. So they have high incomes, they're in families. Well, that makes sense. If you're going to buy expensive milk, that means you probably have families and you're willing to pay the money for them. They're much closer to owners than they are wage earners. They tend to be in urban areas. They're down low in the urban section here, so they're much closer to urban than they are to rural. Rural ones are up high. They tend to be, these are business owners, not business owners, these are homeowners, so they tend to be very much so homeowners as opposed to renters down on this side over here, or over on this side, I should say. And very few singles. We have maybe 500 single people, and those are mostly families who have just gotten old and the children have left, and maybe you've got a couple and in the family, and maybe one of them has died and they're now single, but they're not typically young singles, they're typically old singles. So you can see here that there are all of these marketplaces of these different kinds of buyers. And every one of these markets represent, in terms from the customer perspective, every one of them represents a market niche. And so the question, as we go through this, the question then is, well, okay, where's your market niche? Where's it going to be? And you might say, but we'll just use, coffee as an example. Everybody drinks coffee, right? Well, I guarantee you that if we looked at Starbucks traffic and we could profile all of Starbucks, they would tend to be in a grouping. Maybe, I don't know which one, maybe this one, it may be a little bit more singles, it might be singles, but high income. So, I mean, there are groups here. They're going to have about 80% of their business is going to be from 20% of their customers, and they're going to be different groups. So that's the way we want to look at customers. Competency. Now, these are just brief overviews. We'll go deep in these. So now we talk a little bit more about competency. And another way to look at it, besides the definition that I already gave you, Christian, is that what do they pay you to do? You may have competencies in a lot of things, but the real question is, what do they pay you for? I remember somebody told me that I think they're in the life insurance business, or now I can't remember, but this guy said, "Oh, but we do a lot of work for this group." And I said, "Great, you do a lot of work. So you're telling me that you're able to do that kind of work. Do they pay you for it? How much do they pay you?" And he said, "Well, no, actually, we're having trouble getting paid for that. We actually get paid for this." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I mean, you're projecting that you want to do business in this product or for these people, but that's only 5% of your business, and that 95% of your business is over here on the other scale in this other product. So don't tell me what you want to do, tell me what you do, because competence is defined for what people pay you to do, not what you want to do for them." Okay, so basically in terms of selling, we're really talking about setting your goals, knowing where you're going. We've talked about goal setting and so forth, and then positioning your company so that you create or you control a crack in the market. And then you target the profitable customers using relevant content and media. And so this is kind of all standard stuff. You've seen this a million times before, but so I hope today you've seen a framework on how you actually do that. And so the rest of this series on marketing is going to be talking about the specifics of how you do each and every one of these steps. So I think we are done. And oh my goodness, look what time it is. I completely lost track of the time, and none of you left. Well, maybe some of you did. Okay. So that's it for today, guys. I'm sorry I took so long. And Edgar, it looks like you and I are going to be on in a few minutes. So
yeah, I was gonna see if you want to talk real quick before jumping on there, see what we can come up before going live and
okay,
stuff. Let me send you a link and then we'll talk about it, because
sounds good.
Unless you want to reschedule, and like that we could have a more robust
It's
what do you
up
call
to you. Do you want to? You just want to? Can you delay it for 15 or 20 minutes? Or
yeah, no, there was no scheduled. I didn't schedule it because remember how we did the series for those weeks up until when you said you could do it, and so that's why I didn't have another one scheduled, because I wasn't sure when we were gonna do it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Well, then we'll just send me a link and we'll talk a little bit about it and see where to go. And for the rest of you can watch us live on Facebook on the what's the name of your Facebook page?
The Facebook page, it's that PPP one. That's gonna be a little tough one. I'll send the email to everyone.
It's PPP, like answers and discussion or something like that.
Yeah, let me go.
Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. Good. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Sorry that I ran out of time for comments and questions. We'll try and have more time next time.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Have a good day. Bye.
See ya.